These are the 5 biggest racing mistakes that I found as a racing coach after coaching more than 3,000 students.
We're going through each of these 5 mistakes, how they hurt you out on track, and most importantly, how you can fix them. Because if you don't fix these issues now, and they develop over the course of your racing career into bad habits, they're going to be very, very hard to fix, and they might become a part of your driving style forever. So let's fix these issues now, eliminate them out of your driving, so you can then learn more advanced techniques without these bad habits affecting your driving.
Mistake number 1, I see a lot of beginners just trusting that the car will rotate itself for them and trusting only on the steering. So what do? You learn at first that you have to decelerate in order to be able to make the corner, right? You start braking very hard, you drop the brakes, and you turn into the corner, and then you're gonna find yourself in a situation. If you did decelerate right, then the car is going to turn into the corner, it's gonna be all good, and you're gonna, accelerate out of the corner. That's fine, you survived, you go to the next corner. But what happens if you braked a little bit too little, and by the time you release the brakes, you're a little bit too fast? Now you're going to turn into the corner, the car is not going to rotate enough, and you're going to understeer off, and there's nothing you can do. This is a very common mistake because beginners don't realize that they can actually still use the brakes at a very, very low amount during the corner to help the car rotate and finish the corner. So you have to learn as quickly as possible that you have more than the steering as a tool to rotate the car. You can rotate the car with a little bit of steering, but also a little bit of brakes. So instead of just dropping the brakes very quickly and turning into the corner, drop the brakes a little bit more slowly and try to have that last 1% of brakes. And as you turn into the corner, you're gonna realize that that 1% can help you rotate the car a little bit more. If it's too much rotation, then you can drop back to 0 again. If it's not enough rotation, you can add a little bit more brakes, not too much, especially if the car doesn't have ABS, because if you add too much brakes and too much steering, you're going to lock the inside front. So this is a very precise technique that you can develop very early by just practicing it, especially in the simulator, which is a little bit of trail braking. It's not necessarily a high-level trail braking yet, but it's just so that you can start feeling, understanding that you can actually turn the car a little bit more with the brakes. This is a very, very effective way for you to find seconds per lap time because it's going to give you a lot more confidence when you're releasing the brakes and turning into the corner. It's going to decrease the amount of times you're going to go off, which allows you to develop your technique more and more because you're going to be more consistent. You're going to spend more time on track learning your driving. So the mistake number 1 is to just release the brakes into the corner and pray that the car is going to do its thing. Remember, you have way more control on your left foot to influence the rotation of the car, not only using the brakes for deceleration, but also for rotation mid-corner.
Moving on to number 2, it actually works really well after we just spoke about number 1. And this is something I see a lot in my personal coaching sessions. It has to do with drivers being afraid of the wrong parts of the corner. I totally understand drivers being afraid of their brake point. They don't want to get that wrong. They don't want to completely blow past the apex. I totally understand drivers being afraid of, for example, the initial release of the brake as they're turning in, because there's a lot of things going on at that portion of the corner. For example, you're doing your engine braking, you're first starting to release the brakes, you're also committing to the turn in. There's a lot going on that produces a lot of cognitive load. I totally get why drivers might be afraid in that portion of the corner. But the one thing that drivers shouldn't be afraid of is trying to rotate the car more mid-corner. The reason for this is because there's actually not a lot of things you have to focus on. For example, the 2 main things that are going to be contributing towards your rotation at that point is going to be, of course, a little bit of trail brake, but primarily your steering as well. The mistake a lot of drivers make mentally is that they think the steering is something scary. You shouldn't be afraid of the steering. Even if you do go over the limit of the steering, you steer too quickly, you steer too much, your maximum steering angle is too aggressive, you're gonna go over the limit of the front tires, which again is understeer. Understeer is actually very safe. Drivers put themselves in scenarios where they get afraid, where they lose the car, typically when you're in a state of oversteer. But if you're understeering, it's actually pretty easy to recover from. Try and force a little bit more brake into the car to, force those front tires into the ground. You open up the wheel a little bit. Just generally, it requires a little bit of patience. So number 2 is going to be focused on making sure you're not afraid of rotating the car at the lowest speed in the corner. Experiment with a little bit faster of a steering motion, experiment with a little bit more steering angle, and you might find that you do get more rotation out of the car. And again, worst case scenario, you keep the car on track, and you get to try it again the next lap. In fact, it's probably the safest thing you can do is trying to get more rotation at your lowest speed. The reason why? Well, let's think about it for a second. If you're not rotating the car as effectively as you possibly could, as effectively as the tires will allow you, you're gonna have to force some rotation as you're rolling onto the throttle. And to me, that is an absolute recipe for a disaster. I'm sure everybody watching this video when you were getting started, or even now, have struggled with the car spinning as you're rolling onto the throttle. The reason why? You're trying to force the car to rotate, and you're trying to compensate for the lack of rotation you produced entering the corner and roughly at the apex. So when you do try to force more rotation with the steering with a little bit more trail brake, you're going to notice that your exits all of a sudden become way easier. You're going to be able to roll on the throttle at a much faster, more linear rates, and all of a sudden you're safer, more efficient, and most importantly, faster.
Number 3, this is extremely important because it's going to make you a safer driver, a better driver. It's going to improve your reaction times, and most of the time, it's going to allow the car make corrections for you. A very common thing is for drivers to force their way on the racing line while ignoring what the car is trying to tell you. How does that translate into driving? Well, you brake, you start turning to the corner, and let's say you're a little bit too fast. You look at the apex and you're like, I'm gonna get that apex. You force the car into the corner, you force the car into that apex, and you end up actually losing the car and spinning or just understeering even more and going off on the exit. Why is that? Because you ignored what the car was trying to tell you. You ignored the balance of the car while over-focusing, over-obsessing about the apex itself. This is what I call driving the line versus driving the car. You drive the line when you force the car to do a line while ignoring the balance of the car. And driving the car is a much better approach because you're constantly thinking about what is happening with the tires, and you try to, on the limit, build a line afterwards. So driving the car should be your priority number 1, and then you find your line and you build the racing lines and the speeds that you need to do so that you can match those two things. You can drive the car at its limit, and that happens to also be the line that the car is taking. So number 3 mistake is actually gripping the steering wheel too hard. You are forcing the car into the corner, you're strangling the steering wheel, you're ignoring what the car is trying to tell you. And how is the car trying to tell you something through the steering? Well, through the force feedback. This is our most important source of feedback, especially in the simulator, but also in real life. If you relax your hands and you turn just enough, you're going to allow the self-centering forces from the steering wheel to tell you what's the balance of the car. If you get into neutral steer, right in between oversteer and understeer, you're going to realize that with more grip on the front tires, the steering gets heavier. The self-centering forces get heavier and you have to actually fight a little bit against it. But some cars have a very light steering wheel and a very light feedback. So if you just grip the steering too hard, you completely ignore that whisper, that small feedback that is so valuable and that is gonna give you so much information about the balance of the car. So relax your hands a little bit more, try to feel the balance of the car, and if you feel that the car is a little bit too fast and it's getting oversteer and you're not gonna get the apex, don't force your way into the apex, just ignore it. Actually brake a little bit on a straighter line if possible and then turn again. Miss the apex, but at least you're gonna stay on track. Actually, I have many stories in iRacing of people sending me messages during practice sessions or even races asking me, how do you go so fast? You're missing all the apexes. Well, that's because although I was missing the apexes, I was completely focused on getting as much rotation as I could and carry as much speed as I could without overdriving the car and without spinning. So I was constantly thinking about the balance of the car, relaxing my hands, talking to the car, dancing with the car on that, very, very subtle oversteer and maintaining that oversteer for as long as possible. And that is only possible if you relax your hands and you hear metaphorically the force feedback through your hands.
Now, while we have talked a lot about racing technique as an individual, the next one has to do with Racecraft. Now, you can practice all you want, you can become a super fast hot lapper, but at the end of the day, if you can't race cars while also focusing on optimizing your own driving, you're going to have a very tough go at not only passing cars, but defending and ultimately having a good finishing position in your races. One of the biggest challenges I had when I started was that when I was following other cars really closely behind, I wasn't fully able to hit my marks perfectly as I did when I was hot lapping. I wasn't able to feel the car all that much. And that resulted in me having slower lap times, not able to pass cars who I was faster, just because my mind was so overloaded with whether I was going to hit them or stay close enough, keep up in the draft, things of that nature. In the end, it turns out that my biggest problem was that I was staring at the car that was directly in front of me. Now, this caused a lot of issues for me. Number one, of course, it meant that I wasn't able to see my references all that much because I had such a big tunnel vision to the car in front of me. And number two, possibly the more important part, is that because I cared so much, probably too much, of the car in front of me, I wasn't able to activate some of those instinctive feelings that I have of the car for things such as the force feedback, feeling how much grip the tires have, whether I can push it more, whether I am close to the limit, listening to things like the tire sounds, etc. And this meant that overall, I just wasn't being as efficient as I could with the car, all due to the fact that I was just mentally overloaded with focusing on the car that was in front of me. So the key to this story is to honestly just not care as much about the other cars on track. Yes, you have to leave room. Yes, it's important to understand the behaviors of the cars around you, but if there's a car in front of you, you have to kind of understand that he's roughly around your skill level. So you don't want to overload your mind too much, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, thinking about, okay, where is this driver going to brake? Where is he going to turn in? Things of that nature. The moral of the story here for number 4 is to shift the way you're focusing your vision out on track. When you are behind another driver, you don't necessarily have to have your full focus vision-wise on their specific car. In fact, what I would want you guys to do, and this made a big difference for me, was to use my focused vision at actually looking at my references, such as my braking point, my turning point, the apex, things of that nature, and actually let my peripheral vision take care of the car in front of me. Now, this allowed me to be more precise because it wasn't necessarily just the vision that I was changing. I actually had more mental clarity this way. Because my vision was focused on what I would normally look at when hot lapping, like my references, it almost made a mental shift in my mind to continue driving as I normally would, rather than alter my driving just because there is a car in front of me. All of a sudden, I was more precise, had a better feel of the car because I had the mental bandwidth to feel things like the force feedback, as Swelio talked about before. And if we want to connect it to point number 3, all of a sudden, I wasn't death gripping the wheel. I had light hands. It gave me a better connection to the car just because I adjusted my vision and freed up a lot of that mental space.
And number 5, I deal with a lot of beginners struggling with this one. This is the big consistency killer, and here's why. A lot of drivers are afraid of what they're going to do with the inputs at the very beginning of the corner. And the corner begins with braking. Most of the corners, especially the hard braking ones, are the ones where the braking references and the deceleration performance matters the most. Because if you don't decelerate exactly in the same way, your corner entry speed is going to be different, and then everything else is going to be unpredictable. Imagine you get into a corner at 100 kilometers per hour and it looks fine, but then you can't really get to 100 kilometers per hour every time, because sometimes you're braking a little bit too slow, sometimes you're braking a little bit too soft and too fast, which means every lap you're turning into the corner at a different speed, which makes it completely confusing and frustrating for you. You lose consistency and you don't know exactly what to change, and sometimes you don't even know. You start turning into the corner, it feels off, it feels wrong, and you didn't realize that the problem started 3 seconds ago when you started braking. So when you are braking on a straight line, you have to find a nice way to go straight to a specific percentage and stay there and wait for the car to slow down and brake fast. Your initial brake application cannot be contaminated by hesitation. You can't just be afraid of braking, because if you're afraid of braking, you start braking very slowly. And here's the problem. Let's say you start braking, but you're a little bit afraid, you end up braking very slowly. If you start braking very slowly, by the time you reach your full deceleration performance by reaching the highest braking pressure, your car might have already traveled hundreds of meters. That means that your braking reference was essentially useless. If you want your braking reference to really help you, you need to make sure that you hit your peak pressure by your reference. So if your reference is the number 4 board, then try to brake very quickly so that your deceleration starts always at the exact same point, which will get you to the exact same entry speed by the time you start turning into the corner. Do not hesitate under braking, because that's precisely where you need to be very sharp with your inputs so that you always accelerate the car exactly the same way, and only then you're able to actually improve your cornering speed. If you're able to always carry the same speed, then you can try trail braking less, trail braking more, turning less, and you're gonna have all this experience inside the corner and improve your mid corner and exit. But if your entry speeds are constantly different, you're never gonna have a reliable or consistent way to practice your mid-corner inputs. I say that a lot in my online courses and to my students. With an imperfect entry, it is absolutely impossible to have a perfect exit. So make sure the beginning of the whole process is the braking. Make sure that beginning is extremely consistent, and for you to get there at first, make sure you brake fast and always at the very same spot. Listen, these 5 mistakes are so common. I see them all the time. And those are some of the first things that we fix with all our academy students. But there's way more. We teach a lot of stuff. And because we were aware of all these little issues, we created 20 free challenges in iRacing. They range from easy to medium to hard and even wet scenarios. And we have tutorials explaining how to beat each challenge. I spent many hours picking each challenge specifically to solve each driving issue. Each challenge has a lap time to beat that will give you a gold medal, a silver medal, or a bronze medal. And we have tutorials explaining what is the main thing you should work on to beat these lap times and to improve your driving. Again, it's free. All you need to do is register your free account at the Almeida Racing Academy. And if you have any question, you can hop on Discord. We have 12,000 drivers sharing their tips and tricks and challenges and discussing everything you want about racing technique. Thank you, Connor, for participating in this video today, and I'll see you guys on track. Bye.
6 years ago, this was my simulator. Now, I'm a Radical US champion and IMSA driver. My technique in the simulator is what brought me here. Now, I created the Almeida Racing Academy, a place where members can participate in weekly broadcasted championship races, practice sessions, coaching workshops, and much more. We already have 11,000 students in the academy, and we're growing faster than ever. Our membership gives you everything you need every week to improve consistently and become a competitive driver. So join now as a member, and I'll see you on track.